I was standing in the marble lobby of the Grand Celestine Resort, watching my husband-to-be charm the event coordinator about budget adjustments for our wedding reception, when I heard him say the words that changed everything. Actually, we need to remove someone from the guest list. My fiancé's +1 situation got complicated. He handed her a piece of paper with my name on it, my own name, crossed out. By morning, I'd made a decision that would cost him everything he thought he knew about power. Before we dive back in, drop a comment and let us know where you're watching from. And if this story hit home, hit that subscribe button. I've got something really special lined up for tomorrow. My name is Adrienne Sinclair, though for the past 18 months, I'd been living as Adrienne Blackthorne, hiding my true identity from everyone, including the man I thought I was going to marry. You see, I'm the majority owner of Sinclair Hospitality Group, a luxury hotel chain with 43 properties across North America and Europe. The Grand Celestine Resort, where our wedding was supposed to take place, was my crown jewel, a $200 million property overlooking the Pacific coast that I'd personally designed and developed. But nobody knew that. Not my fiancé Damien, not our mutual friends, not even my own wedding planner. 2 years earlier, I'd made a decision that seemed romantic at the time, but now felt like the most naive choice of my life. After my previous relationship ended, when I discovered my ex was more interested in my portfolio than my personality, I decided to try something different. I wanted to know what it felt like to be loved for who I was, not what I owned. So when I moved to Millbrook Bay, a charming coastal town about 90 minutes from Seattle, I created a new identity. I rented a modest apartment under my mother's maiden name, got a job as a freelance marketing consultant, and told everyone I was just a regular woman starting over after a difficult breakup. The trust fund that generated my living expenses, I explained it away as a small inheritance from my grandmother. It was in Millbrook Bay's tiny bookstore cafe that I met Damien Blackthorne. He was everything my usual circle of wealthy suitors wasn't. Authentic, down-to-earth, refreshingly unimpressed by luxury brands or name-dropping. He worked as a project manager for a mid-sized construction company, drove a 10-year-old pickup truck, and took me on dates to local diners instead of Michelin-starred restaurants. For the first time in years, I felt like I was being seen for my personality, my humor, my values, not my net worth. Damien would hold doors for elderly customers at the grocery store, remember the names of servers at restaurants, and spend his Saturdays volunteering at the community center. When he proposed 6 months ago on a sunset beach walk, using his grandmother's simple gold ring, I cried tears of pure joy. The wedding planning had been deliberately modest. We'd chosen the Grand Celestine not because I owned it, but because Damien had always dreamed of having his wedding somewhere really special, just once in our lives. I'd quietly arranged for a significant discount through my assistant, telling Damien it was a promotional rate for off-season bookings. The guest list was small, 50 people total. My side included a few carefully chosen friends from Millbrook Bay, plus my sister Camille, who was the only person who knew my real identity. She'd agreed to play along with my experiment, though she'd warned me repeatedly that building a relationship on deception, even well-intentioned deception, was dangerous territory. Damien's side included his parents, his younger brother Trevor, and about 20 friends from work and college. Simple, genuine people who welcomed me into their circle without question. His mother had even started calling me her bonus daughter. 3 weeks before the wedding, I'd started having doubts. Not about Damien, I loved him completely, but about the secret I was keeping. How could I start a marriage with such a fundamental lie between us? I'd been planning to tell him everything during our honeymoon in Greece, the perfect romantic setting for confessing that his wife was actually worth several $100 million and owned half the luxury properties we'd probably visit. I imagined his shock, then his laughter, then his amazement. "You mean we never have to worry about money again?" he'd say, spinning me around in our hotel suite. It would be the perfect fairy tale moment where love conquered all complications. Last Tuesday, I'd driven to the Grand Celestine to finalize the last-minute details. The event coordinator, Sarah Chen, was someone I'd worked with on multiple corporate events, though she knew me only as the mysterious consultant who occasionally represented high-end clients. I'd maintained my Adrienne Blackthorne identity even in professional settings at my own hotel. I was supposed to meet Damien there at 2 p.m. to confirm the final headcount, approve the menu selections, and review the ceremony timeline. I'd arrived 15 minutes early, parking my modest Honda Civic next to the valet station where I'd normally have my Porsche waiting. The Grand Celestine's lobby was a masterpiece of marble and crystal, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking manicured gardens that led to a private beach. Every detail had been personally selected by me during the design phase. The imported Italian marble, the custom-blown glass chandeliers, the original artwork from emerging Pacific Northwest artists. It was my vision brought to life. As I walked across that familiar marble floor, admiring the afternoon light streaming through windows I'd positioned for exactly this effect, I felt a surge of pride mixed with anticipation. In 10 days, I'd be walking down an aisle in the Ocean View Ballroom, marrying the man who loved me for all the right reasons. That's when I spotted Damien near the concierge desk, already deep in conversation with Sarah. He was gesturing animatedly, that charming smile I'd fallen in love with spreading across his face as he worked his natural charisma on the coordinator. I slowed my approach, planning to surprise him with a hug from behind. We'd been so busy with work and wedding preparations that we'd barely seen each other this week. I was looking forward to this moment of connection, this shared excitement about our approaching celebration. I was close enough to hear their conversation, close enough to see the papers spread across the marble counter, close enough to witness the exact moment my fairy tale began its brutal collapse into nightmare. And that's when I heard those words that would haunt me forever. Actually, we need to remove someone from the guest list. My fiancé's +1 situation got complicated. Sarah looked confused, shuffling through her papers. Of course, Mr. Blackthorne. Which guest should I remove? I watched, frozen in disbelief, as Damien handed her a handwritten note. From my position behind a decorative pillar, I could see my own name, written in his familiar handwriting. Adrienne Blackthorne. Cancelled. My legs went weak. My vision blurred at the edges. This had to be some kind of mistake, some misunderstanding that we'd laugh about later. But then Sarah asked the question that confirmed my worst fear. So, just to clarify, the bride won't be attending her own wedding reception? Damien's life was casual, almost amused. Oh, there's not going to be a bride. This one took us ages to get right, so if you're loving it, hitting subscribe would honestly mean the world to us. Okay, back to business. So, just to clarify, the bride won't be attending her own wedding reception? Damien's laugh was casual, almost amused. Oh, there's not going to be a bride. The words hit me like a physical blow. I gripped the marble pillar for support, my designer engagement ring suddenly feeling like it weighed 1,000 pounds. This couldn't be real. There had to be some explanation, some misunderstanding I was missing. Sarah's professional composure wavered. I'm sorry, Mr. Blackthorne. I'm not following. Are you postponing the wedding? Not postponing, Damien said with the same charming smile I'd fallen in love with, spreading across his face as he worked his natural charisma on the coordinator. He was gesturing animatedly, that charming smile I'd fallen in love with spreading across his face as he worked his natural charisma on the coordinator. He leaned a little more casually against the counter, as if he was discussing weekend plans. There's been a change of bride. Change of bride? What did that even mean? I don't understand, Sarah said, echoing my own thoughts. Damien pulled out his phone and showed her something on the screen. Even from my hiding spot, I could see it was a photo. This is Jessica Romano. She'll be the one walking down the aisle next Saturday. Same dress size as Adrienne, same general build. We've been planning this for months. Jessica Romano?
The name hit me like a slap. I knew that name. She was Damien's ex-girlfriend from college, the one he'd mentioned casually in passing. Just a friend now, he'd always said when her name came up in conversation. Ancient history. Sarah stared at the phone, then back at Damien. Mr. Blackthorne, I have to say, this is completely unprecedented. You're telling me you're switching brides 6 days before the wedding? Think of it as an upgrade, Damien said with that charming smile that once made my heart flutter. Now it made me sick. Jessica comes from a much better family. Her father owns Romano Construction. You know, the company that built half of the luxury developments in Seattle. Much better connections for my career. The pieces began falling into place with sickening clarity. Romano Construction. I'd heard Damien mention wanting to get promoted to senior project manager, complaining about being passed over for clients with better connections. Jessica Romano wasn't just his ex-girlfriend. She was his ticket to a better professional future. But what about Miss Blackthorne? She doesn't know about this change? Damien's laugh was genuinely amused now. Adrienne has no idea. She thinks she's marrying the love of her life next Saturday. She's probably at home right now addressing invitations or doing whatever brides do. I was not at home addressing invitations. I was hiding behind a marble pillar in my own hotel, listening to my fiancé plan to humiliate me in the most public way possible. She'd show up in her wedding dress, walk down that aisle, and find Jessica waiting at the altar instead of her. Can you imagine her face?
Sarah looked horrified. Sir, that's cruel. Why would you want to hurt someone like that? For the first time, Damien's expression hardened. Because she deserves it. Do you know what it's like being with someone who thinks they're better than you? Someone who pays for everything with their little trust fund? Who never lets you forget that you're just a construction worker dating up? My heart shattered. Trust fund? Dating up? I'd gone out of my way to live modestly, to never make him feel inferior. Every expensive dinner I'd paid for, I'd claimed was a work bonus. Every gift I'd said was on sale. I'd hidden my wealth specifically to avoid making him feel this way. She talks about wanting a simple life, he continued, his voice dripping with resentment. But she chose the most expensive venue in the county. She orders wine that costs more than my truck payment and pretends it's just something nice. She's condescending and fake, and it's time someone taught her what rejection feels like. Each word felt like a knife twisting in my chest. The wine I'd ordered was from my own hotel's cellar, priced at cost. The venue wasn't expensive for me because I owned it. Every gesture he was interpreting as condescension had been carefully calculated to share my world with him without making him feel inadequate. Sarah was clearly uncomfortable with the entire conversation. Mr. Blackthorne, I have to ask, how exactly do you expect this to work logistically? The invitations have been sent. The guests are expecting to see Miss Blackthorne. That's the beautiful part, Damien said, his excitement growing. Most of the guests are my friends and family. They'll go along with whatever I tell them. And Adrienne's side, there's only about 10 people. Her sister, a few friends from that little town she lives in. When they see Jessica at the altar, they'll figure it out pretty quickly. My sister, Camille, she would be there, expecting to watch me marry the man I thought I loved. She would witness my humiliation along with everyone else. As for the logistics, we just need to make a few small changes. Jessica's preferences for flowers, music, that sort of thing. The important thing is that everything looks normal until Adrienne shows up. Sarah looked down at her papers, clearly wrestling with her professional obligations. Sir, I have to be honest, this puts the hotel in a very difficult situation. We have contracts with Miss Blackthorne. She's paid deposits. Legally, we can't just... Actually, Damien interrupted, pulling a folder from his messenger bag, check her contract.
I'm listed as co-signer on all the arrangements. I have the legal right to make changes." My stomach dropped. He was right. When we'd booked the wedding, I'd insisted on putting both our names on the contracts to make him feel like an equal partner in the planning. That decision was about to become the weapon he used to destroy me. Sarah reluctantly took the paperwork and flipped through it. Her face fell as she found what she was looking for. "You're right. You do have authorization to modify the arrangements." "Perfect," Damien said, clapping his hands together. "So we're all set. Same wedding, different bride. Jessica's already picked out her dress, something more elegant than what Adrienne chose. The photographer knows about the switch. The musicians are prepared for different processional music. Even the minister is in on it." The minister was in on it. Father Martinez, who had counseled us through our pre-marital sessions, who had spoken about the sacred nature of commitment, who had looked me in the eye and talked about the importance of honesty in marriage. He knew about this betrayal and had said nothing. "The only person who doesn't know," Damien concluded with obvious satisfaction, "is the one person who shouldn't know. Adrienne will get the surprise of her lifetime." Sarah set down the papers with visible reluctance. "Mr. Blackthorne, I have to say, as a professional in the hospitality industry, this is the most uncomfortable situation I've ever encountered. That woman is going to be devastated." "She'll get over it," Damien said dismissively. "Maybe it'll teach her some humility. Maybe she'll learn not to look down on people who work for a living." Work for a living? I thought of the 12-hour days I'd put in building my business, the years of travel and negotiation and risk-taking that had created the luxury empire I now owned. I thought of the staff I employed, the families I supported, the economic impact of my properties. But in his mind, I was just a privileged princess living off family money. "There is one more thing," Damien said, his voice taking on a more serious tone. "I need your absolute discretion about this. If word gets out before Saturday, it ruins everything. Can I count on your professionalism?" Sarah nodded reluctantly. "Of course. Client confidentiality is paramount." "Excellent." Damien gathered his papers and tucked them back into his bag. "I'll be in touch about the final details. Oh, and Sarah, make sure the ballroom has extra security on Saturday. I have a feeling Adrienne might not take the news well." Extra security at my own hotel to protect against my reaction to being publicly humiliated.
As Damien walked toward the lobby exit, he paused and turned back to Sarah with an afterthought. "Actually, there is one more small favor. When Adrienne inevitably calls here crying and asking questions, I need you to tell her that the booking was canceled due to a scheduling conflict. Don't mention Jessica, don't mention the switch. Just say the wedding can't happen here as planned." "That's not true, though," Sarah protested weakly. "It's customer service," Damien replied smoothly. "You're protecting her feelings by letting her down gently instead of telling her the brutal truth. Trust me, it's a kindness." With that, he strolled out of the Grand Celestine's lobby, whistling softly to himself, leaving Sarah staring after him with obvious distress. I remained frozen behind the marble pillar for several more minutes, my mind struggling to process the enormity of what I'd just witnessed. This wasn't a sudden decision or a moment of cold feet. This was a calculated, long-term plan to humiliate me as publicly and thoroughly as possible. He'd recruited accomplices, he'd planned logistics, he'd secured legal authorization to use my own contracts against me. He'd even arranged for extra security to handle my reaction. And the worst part? He genuinely believed I deserved it. As I finally forced my trembling legs to carry me out of my own hotel, one thought crystallized in my mind with perfect, cold clarity. Damien had made one critical error in his elaborate plan for revenge. He had no idea who he was really dealing with. I drove home in a daze, my hands shaking so badly I had to pull over twice to compose myself. My modest apartment in Millbrook Bay felt like a stage set now, props in an elaborate performance that was about to reach its devastating finale. Everything I'd carefully constructed to create our normal life suddenly looked pathetic through Damien's eyes.
The apartment I'd chosen specifically for its humble charm, the secondhand furniture I'd bought to appear financially modest, the generic art on the walls instead of the original pieces from my personal collection, even the Honda Civic in the driveway instead of my Porsche. It had all been interpreted as condescension rather than consideration. I sat on my thrift store couch, still wearing the simple sundress I'd chosen for our venue meeting, and tried to make sense of what I'd witnessed. The man who had held me while I cried about my grandmother's death, who had surprised me with homemade soup when I was sick, who had spent an hour helping an elderly neighbor fix her broken porch step, that man was planning to destroy me for sport. But as the initial shock began to wear off, something else took its place. A cold, analytical clarity that I recognized from my business dealings. This wasn't the time for tears or self-pity. This was the time for investigation. I opened my laptop and began with Jessica Romano. If she was going to be walking down my aisle in my venue, I needed to understand exactly who I was dealing with. Social media revealed a picture that made my stomach churn. She'd been posting photos with Damien for months. Cozy dinners at restaurants I'd never heard of, weekend trips to locations he'd never mentioned. A particular photo from 3 weeks ago showed them at a wine tasting in Napa Valley, taken the same weekend he told me he was visiting his sick uncle in Portland. The comments under her posts were revealing. Friends congratulating her on finally getting her happy ending and showing everyone that good girls finish first. One comment from her sister made my blood run cold. Can't wait for the big day. Damien's plan is absolutely genius. She'll never see it coming. This wasn't just an affair. This was a coordinated campaign. I pulled up Romano Construction's website and corporate filings. Jessica's father, Vincent Romano, had built a construction empire worth approximately $50 million. More importantly, they were currently bidding on 3 major luxury hotel projects in the Seattle area, projects that would naturally require partnerships with hospitality groups like mine. The pieces of Damien's motivation became clear. This wasn't just about replacing me with someone better connected. This was about positioning himself for a business opportunity that could transform his entire career trajectory. Next, I called my assistant Rebecca, who managed my affairs under my real identity. I'd kept her completely separate from my Millbrook Bay life, but now I needed access to resources that Adrienne Blackthorne simply didn't have. Rebecca, I need you to run background checks on 2 people immediately. I gave her Damien and Jessica's full names. I need everything: financial records, employment history, social connections, legal issues, the works. I also need you to pull the guest list for the Romano Construction holiday party from last December. Miss Sinclair, is everything all right? You sound upset. I paused, considering how much to reveal. I'm fine, just need to verify some information for a potential business partnership. How quickly can you get this to me? Give me 4 hours for the preliminary report, 24 for the comprehensive analysis. While I waited, I decided to test my suspicions about the scope of this conspiracy. I called Father Martinez, the minister who was supposedly in on it, according to Damien's conversation with Sarah.
"Father, it's Adrienne," I said when he answered. "I wanted to check on the final details for Saturday's ceremony." There was a pause that lasted just a beat too long. "Of course, my dear. Everything is proceeding as planned." "Is there anything you need from me? Any last-minute changes to discuss?" Another pause. No changes. Everything will be exactly as it should be." The way he said "as it should be" made my skin crawl. This man had counseled us about honesty and commitment, and he was actively participating in a plan to humiliate me publicly. "Father, I was wondering, have you had any other conversations about the ceremony? With Damien, perhaps?" "Well, yes, he did stop by earlier this week to discuss some adjustments to the proceedings, but nothing you need to worry about, my dear." Adjustments. The euphemism was almost insulting. I hung up and immediately called the photographer Damien had mentioned. When I identified myself as the bride, the woman's voice became noticeably strained. "Oh, Ms. Blackthorne. Yes, well, we're all set for Saturday. Though I should mention, there have been some modifications to the shot list. What kind of modifications? Your fiancé requested that we focus more on candid reactions from the guests, particularly around the moment when the ceremony begins. They wanted to document my humiliation. They planned to capture every moment of my shock and devastation for posterity. By evening, Rebecca's preliminary report had arrived via encrypted email, and it painted a picture that was even worse than I'd imagined. Damien wasn't just planning to leave me for Jessica. He was in serious financial trouble. His credit cards were maxed out, he had 3 outstanding loans, and he owed money to several creditors. The Romano construction connection wasn't just about career advancement. It was about financial survival. More damaging was the timeline Rebecca had constructed, from social media posts, credit card records, and phone logs. Damien had been planning this switch for at least 6 months, dating back to when Jessica had returned to Seattle after finishing her MBA in New York. Every romantic gesture he had made during that time, every declaration of love, every intimate moment we had shared, it had all been performance art, designed to keep me compliant while he orchestrated his exit strategy. The Romano holiday party guest list revealed that Damien had attended as Jessica's date, introduced to her father and the construction company's leadership team as her serious boyfriend. This was in early December, a month before he had proposed to me with his grandmother's ring. The ring. I looked down at the simple gold band with its modest diamond, the one he'd presented to me with tears in his eyes while talking about his grandmother's 60-year marriage. According to Rebecca's research, his grandmother had died 5 years earlier, and the ring had been purchased from a pawn shop 2 days before he proposed. Even the proposal had been a calculated lie. The next morning, I decided to conduct one final test. I called Damien, using the casual tone I'd perfected over 18 months of hiding my true identity. "Hi, honey. I was just thinking about the wedding, and I wanted to run something by you." "Sure, babe. What's up?" His voice was warm, loving, completely normal. The man who had spoken so coldly about my humiliation yesterday was now playing the devoted fiancé. I was wondering if we should have a backup plan just in case something goes wrong with the venue. You know how these luxury places can be. Sometimes they overbook or have issues. There was a slight pause. "Why would you think something might go wrong?" "Oh, no reason. I just want to be prepared. Maybe we should have a contact number for the event coordinator, just in case we need to make last-minute changes." "That's sweet of you to worry, but I'm sure everything will be fine. The venue is locked in, all the arrangements are confirmed, nothing is going to change." The confidence in his voice was chilling. He was so certain of his control over the situation, so convinced that his plan was foolproof. "Okay, if you're sure. I just love you so much and want everything to be perfect." "I love you too, Adrienne. Saturday is going to be a day you will never forget." After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen for a long time, staring out the window at the modest neighborhood I'd chosen for my experiment in authentic living. The irony was overwhelming. In trying to find genuine love by hiding my wealth, I had attracted someone whose love was so fake that he was willing to destroy me for financial gain. But as I reviewed Rebecca's comprehensive report that afternoon, I began to see something else in the patterns of deception and manipulation. Damien had made one critical error in his elaborate plan for revenge and advancement. He had chosen to humiliate me at my own property, using my own contracts in front of my own staff, while targeting business connections that were already within my sphere of influence. Vincent Romano's construction company was currently negotiating with Sinclair Hospitality Group for 3 major projects. Those negotiations were being handled directly by me.
though Romano had no idea that the Adrienne Blackthorne his daughter was about to publicly humiliate was actually the CEO who controlled his company's future.
Jessica Romano worked as a marketing director at a boutique firm that had been courting Sinclair Hospitality Group as a client for over a year. Her professional future depended on relationships with companies like mine. The Grand Celestine Resort, where they planned to stage their elaborate betrayal, wasn't just the venue I'd chosen for our wedding. It was my flagship property, the crown jewel of my hospitality empire. Every single person Damien had recruited for his conspiracy, from Father Martinez to the photographer to the musicians, depended on relationships with luxury venues like mine for their livelihoods. As the full scope of his mistake became clear, I felt something I hadn't experienced since discovering the betrayal. I smiled. Damien thought he was orchestrating my downfall. In reality, he just handed me every tool I needed to orchestrate his. But first, I needed to make one phone call to my sister Camille, the only person who knew my true identity and who would be sitting in that audience on Saturday, expecting to watch me marry the man I loved. Camille, we need to talk, and you're going to want to sit down for this conversation. My conversation with Camille lasted 3 hours and covered every detail of what I'd discovered. She listened without interruption as I outlined Damien's plan, Jessica's involvement, the financial motivations, and the scope of the conspiracy. When I finished, there was a long silence. "Adrienne," she said finally, "I'm going to say something you won't want to hear. Part of this is your fault." I bristled. How is any of this my fault? I loved him genuinely. I supported him. I tried to be the woman he said he wanted. By lying to him every single day for 18 months, she replied bluntly. You built your entire relationship on deception. Yes, his response is cruel and unforgivable, but you can't be surprised that a relationship built on lies ended in betrayal. Her words stung because they contained truth I didn't want to acknowledge. I was protecting our relationship. I wanted him to love me for who I really am. But he doesn't know who you really are. He's never known. The woman he's about to humiliate isn't you. It's the character you created. Adrienne Blackthorne, the modest trust fund recipient with simple dreams, doesn't exist. I sat with that reality for a moment. She was right. Damien was betraying a fiction I'd created, not the real me. The real me, Adrienne Sinclair, CEO of a luxury hotel empire, had never been in this relationship at all. So, what are you going to do? Camille asked. I'd been asking myself the same question since yesterday. I had several options, each with different consequences and moral implications. Option 1, disappear. Simply not show up on Saturday. Let Damien and Jessica have their wedding, avoid the public humiliation, and move on with my life. It was the safe choice, the one that protected my dignity and avoided confrontation. Option 2, confront Damien privately, tell him I knew about his plan, reveal my true identity, and give him a chance to call off the cruel spectacle. It was the mature choice, the one that might salvage some shred of decency from this disaster. Option 3, show up on Saturday and let the humiliation play out exactly as Damien planned, then reveal afterward that he just publicly betrayed the owner of the venue and destroyed his professional future in the process. It was the revenge choice, satisfying but potentially destructive. Option 4, take control of the narrative entirely. I'm going to attend my wedding, but not as Adrienne Blackthorne. Over the next 2 days, I put together the most important business plan of my life. I started by calling Vincent Romano directly, introducing myself as Adrienne Sinclair, CEO of Sinclair Hospitality Group, and requesting an urgent meeting about the 3 construction projects his company was bidding on. Ms. Sinclair, what an honor, he said, clearly pleased to hear from me directly. I've been hoping we'd have a chance to discuss these opportunities in person. I'm calling because something has come to my attention regarding your family that could impact our business relationship. Would Saturday afternoon work for a meeting? I'll be at the Grand Celestine Resort for another matter. We scheduled the meeting at 4 p.m., 2 hours after his daughter's wedding ceremony was supposed to begin.
Next, I called the marketing firm where Jessica Romano worked as a director. I spoke with the owner, Margaret Chen, who'd been courting Sinclair Hospitality Group as a client for months. Margaret, I understand one of your directors, Jessica Romano, is getting married this Saturday. I'd like to attend as a representative of our company. Perhaps we could finally discuss that partnership we've been considering. Margaret was thrilled. Miss Sinclair, that would be wonderful. Jessica has been hoping to make that connection. She'll be delighted you're coming to her special day. The irony was exquisite. Jessica's boss was personally inviting the CEO of her target client to witness her betrayal of that same CEO. I also reached out to the other 3 major hotel chains in the Pacific Northwest, all competitors who'd been trying to poach my staff and steal my vendor relationships for years. I casually mentioned that I'd been making some significant changes to my vendor partnerships after Saturday's event at the Grand Celestine.
There's going to be some restructuring in how we work with local service providers, I told each of them. Photographers, musicians, ministers, event planners, we're going to be much more selective about who we recommend to our clients. Word would spread quickly through the tight-knit luxury events community. Everyone who'd agreed to participate in Damien's plan would soon understand that their decision had professional consequences. But the most important call was to Sarah Chen, the event coordinator who'd been forced into an impossible position. Sarah, this is Adrienne Sinclair. I believe you know me as Adrienne Blackthorne. The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. Miss Sinclair? She whispered finally. You own... I own the Grand Celestine Resort, yes, and I heard your conversation with my fiancé on Tuesday afternoon. Oh my God, I am so sorry. I didn't want to go along with it, but he had the contracts and the legal authority, and I didn't know what else to do. Sarah, you're not in trouble. You were put in an impossible situation by someone who manipulated you, but I need your help with something. I outlined my plan, and by the end of our conversation, Sarah was no longer reluctant. She was eager to help expose the cruelties she'd been forced to enable. Friday morning, I drove to Seattle and spent the day transforming myself back to Adrienne Sinclair. Professional hairstyling at the salon that serviced my corporate headshots, a tailored power suit from my real wardrobe, my actual jewelry, including the diamond tennis bracelet that was worth more than Damien's annual salary, my Porsche, detailed and gleaming. I also stopped by my attorney's office to finalize some documents that might become necessary depending on how Saturday played out. Saturday morning arrived gray and drizzly, typical Pacific Northwest weather that matched my mood. I drove to the Grand Celestine Resort in my Porsche, parking in the owner's reserve spot near the main entrance. Several early arriving guests noticed the expensive car and whispered amongst themselves. At 11 a.m., I walked into my own hotel as Adrienne Sinclair for the first time in 18 months. The transformation was complete. From the modest, accommodating fiancé to the confident CEO who'd built a hospitality empire from nothing. Sarah was waiting for me in the executive conference room adjacent to the lobby. She looked nervous, but determined. Everything is in place, she reported. The photographers are set up to capture the processional. The ministers prepared for the ceremony to begin at 2 p.m. Jessica arrived an hour ago with her entourage. She is in the bridal suite getting ready. And Damien? He's in the groom's suite with his groomsmen. He seems very confident, very pleased with himself. I nodded. What about the guests? They're starting to arrive. Your sister is here. She's been asking about you. Damien's family and friends seem excited. A few people have commented that they're surprised Jessica is wearing white, given that she's not the original bride, but Damien told them it was always the plan. The audacity was breathtaking. He was rewriting history in real time, making his conspiracy seem like a legitimate change of plans. There's something else, Sarah continued. Jessica's boss, Margaret, arrived early and has been asking when she can meet you. She seems to think you're here as a business associate, not as the woman being betrayed. She'll get her meeting, just not the kind she's expecting. At 1:45 p.m., I positioned myself in the back of the Ocean View Ballroom.
The room was exactly as I had envisioned when I designed it. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Pacific, crystal chandeliers reflecting the natural light, white silk draping that created an ethereal atmosphere. It was perfect for a wedding, just not this wedding. The 50 guests were seated in neat rows, a mixture of Damien's construction worker friends and family, Jessica's professional colleagues, and the handful of people who'd known me as Adrienne Blackthorne. My sister sat in the front row, elegant in navy blue, her face carefully composed despite the turmoil she must be feeling. At exactly 2 p.m., the processional music began. Damien walked down the aisle in a charcoal gray suit I'd never seen before, followed by his groomsmen. He looked confident, almost triumphant, as he took his position at the altar. His eyes scanned the audience, clearly enjoying the anticipation of what was about to unfold. Father Martinez stepped forward with his ceremonial book, his face a mask of professional solemnity that couldn't quite hide his discomfort with what he was about to facilitate. Then the bridal march began, and Jessica Romano appeared at the back of the ballroom in a stunning white dress that had clearly cost more than my entire modest wardrobe from Millbrook Bay. She was beautiful, confident, radiant as she began her walk down the aisle towards the altar where my fiancé waited. The guests rose to their feet as tradition demanded. Cameras flashed, several people pulled out their phones to record the moment. As Jessica reached the halfway point of her walk, I stepped out from the back corner where I'd been standing and began walking down the side aisle parallel to her path. The first person to notice me was Margaret Chen, Jessica's boss, who'd been expecting to meet me at this event. Her face lit up with recognition and confusion. "Adrienne Sinclair," she called out, her voice carrying across the ballroom. "What are you doing here?"
Other guests began to turn, following Margaret's gaze. Whispers rippled through the crowd as people tried to understand why the CEO of Sinclair Hospitality Group was walking down the aisle at a wedding between a construction worker and a marketing director. Jessica faltered in her steps, her confident smile wavering as she noticed the disturbance in the audience. Damien looked confused, then alarmed, as he saw me approaching from the side aisle. This wasn't part of his plan. The woman walking toward him didn't look like the modest, accommodating Adrienne Blackthorne he'd been expecting to humiliate. I reached the front of the ballroom and stepped up to the altar, standing directly between Damien and Jessica. The music stopped abruptly, leaving the ballroom in stunned silence. "Hello, Damien," I said, my voice carrying clearly through the room's excellent acoustics. "I believe you were expecting someone else." The silence in the ballroom was deafening. 50 guests sat frozen, trying to process what they were witnessing. Jessica stood halfway down the aisle in her elaborate white dress, her bouquet trembling in her hands. Damien's face had gone completely white as he stared at me, not the modest Adrienne Blackthorne he'd planned to humiliate, but someone else entirely. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, my voice carrying clearly through the room's acoustics, "I apologize for interrupting what I'm sure you believed was going to be a beautiful ceremony. My name is Adrienne Sinclair, and I'm the owner and CEO of Sinclair Hospitality Group, which includes this resort where we're gathered today." Murmurs rippled through the audience as people began to put pieces together. Margaret Chen, Jessica's boss, looked like she might faint. Vincent Romano, who'd arrived early for our scheduled meeting, leaned forward in his seat with dawning comprehension. Some of you know me as Adrienne Blackthorne, the woman who was supposed to be marrying Damien today. What you may not know is that Damien has spent considerable time planning this event, not as a celebration of love, but as an elaborate scheme to publicly humiliate someone he believed was beneath his social status. Damien found his voice. "Adrienne, what are you doing? This isn't you. You're confused, upset. Let's talk about this privately." I smiled at his attempt to regain control of the narrative. "Actually, Damien, this is me, the real me. The woman you've been living with for 18 months was a character I created because I wanted to experience what it felt like to be loved for who I am, not what I own." I turned to address the audience directly.
Damien orchestrated the ceremony knowing I would arrive expecting to marry him, only to find another woman in my place. He recruited accomplices, modified legal documents, and arranged for photographers to capture my reaction. He believed this would be appropriate punishment for what he saw as my condescending attitude toward his financial situation. Jessica finally moved, rushing toward Damien. "You told me she knew. You said she'd agreed to step aside. You said this was all arranged." "I told you what you needed to hear," Damien snapped, his mask finally slipping completely. "Just like I told her what she needed to hear. Both of you were useful for different things." The cruelty in his voice silenced the room. Even his own family members looked horrified. Margaret Chen stood up from her seat. "Jessica, is this true? You knew about this plan?" Jessica's composure cracked. "I thought Damien said they'd broken up months ago. He said she was holding on to the wedding arrangements out of spite, that exposing her publicly was the only way to make her let go gracefully." "And you believed that justified participating in someone's humiliation?" Margaret's professional disappointment was evident. I stepped forward, maintaining my calm demeanor. "Jessica, you've been manipulated as well. Damien told you what you needed to hear to gain your cooperation, just as he told me what I needed to hear to maintain my compliance." Vincent Romano rose from his seat, his face grim. "Damien, you work for Morrison Construction, one of our subcontractors, is that correct?" "Yes, sir," Damien replied, clearly confused about why Jessica's father was addressing him. "Not anymore," Vincent said flatly. "Consider your employment terminated immediately. Anyone who would orchestrate something this cruel has no place in our organization." The dominoes began falling quickly. Father Martinez stepped forward and removed his ceremonial vestments. "I cannot and will not continue with the ceremony. I was told this was a complicated situation with an amicable resolution. What I've witnessed today goes against everything I believe about human decency." The photographer began packing his equipment. "I'm not comfortable being part of this anymore. I'll delete everything I've taken today." I held up a hand. "Actually, I think it's important that this moment be documented. Not for cruel entertainment, but as a reminder of what happens when deception becomes the foundation of our relationships." I walked closer to Damien, speaking directly to him for the first time since discovering his plan. "You were right about one thing. I was condescending, but not in the way you thought. I was condescending enough to believe that you couldn't handle the truth about who I really am. I was condescending enough to think that your ego was so fragile, I needed to hide my success to protect your feelings." His jaw tightened. "Your success? You mean your daddy's money?"
I mean, the business empire I built from a single property my father helped me purchase when I was 22. I mean, the 43 luxury hotels I've developed, managed, and expanded over the past 15 years. I mean, the 2,000 employees who depend on the decisions I make every day. I gestured around the ballroom. I designed this room. I selected every fixture, approved every detail, oversaw every aspect of construction. This isn't daddy's money, Damien. This is the result of 15 years of 18-hour days, calculated risks, and strategic partnerships. Vincent Romano nodded approvingly. "Miss Sinclair, I've been trying to secure partnership opportunities with Sinclair Hospitality Group for 3 years. I had no idea my daughter was involved in this situation. Mr. Romano, your daughter was manipulated by someone who saw both of us as stepping stones to advance his own interests. Jessica's career ambitions and your business connections made her a more valuable target than maintaining a relationship with someone he viewed as financially stagnant." I turned back to the assembled guests. This situation taught me something important about authenticity in relationships. I thought I was being authentic by hiding my wealth, but authenticity isn't about concealing uncomfortable truths. It's about creating space for honest communication about who we really are. Camille stood up from her seat in the front row.
tears streaming down her face. "Adrienne, I'm so proud of how you're handling this. But I need to ask, what happens now?" I considered the question carefully. Now, we all learn from this experience. Damien learns that treating people as disposable has consequences. Jessica learns that participating in someone's humiliation, regardless of the justification offered, reflects on her character. And I learn that authentic love requires authentic truth from the beginning. Jessica approached me hesitantly. "Miss Sinclair, I am genuinely sorry. I was so focused on what Damien told me about your relationship that I never stopped to consider how this would feel from your perspective. There's no excuse for my participation in this." Her apology seemed genuine, and I found myself responding without anger. "Jessica, you were targeted by someone who's very skilled at manipulation. The question now is what you do with this knowledge about his character." Margaret Chan had been quiet, but now she spoke up. "Jessica, we'll need to discuss how this impacts your position with the firm. Participating in something like this raises serious questions about judgment and professional ethics." Damien, who'd been watching his carefully constructed plan crumble around him, finally exploded. "This is ridiculous. You're all acting like I committed some crime. I fell in love with someone else. That happens. I found a creative way to end one relationship and begin another. If Adrienne had been honest about who she was from the beginning, none of this would have been necessary." The self-serving rationalization was breathtaking. "Damien, you spent months planning to publicly humiliate someone you claim to love. You recruited accomplices, forged documents, and manipulated multiple people to achieve that goal. You told Jessica I was holding on to wedding arrangements out of spite. You told Father Martinez this was an amicable situation. You told the photographer to focus on capturing reaction shots of my devastation." I paused, letting that sink in. "Most importantly, you made these decisions while living in my home, sleeping in my bed, and accepting my financial support? If you wanted to end our relationship, a conversation would have been sufficient. Instead, you chose cruelty as your preferred method of communication." Vincent Romano gathered his belongings. "Miss Sinclair, I'd like to reschedule our business meeting for a more appropriate time. What I've witnessed today has given me a great deal to consider regarding character assessment in professional relationships." As guests began to file out of the ballroom, many stopping to offer me words of support or apology for their role in witnessing the planned humiliation, I felt something I hadn't expected. Relief. For 18 months, I'd been performing the role of someone smaller, quieter, less ambitious than who I really am. I dimmed my light to make someone else more comfortable, and in return, that person had tried to extinguish it entirely. Sarah approached me as the ballroom emptied. "Miss Sinclair, what would you like us to do with the reception arrangements?" I considered the question. The Ocean View Ballroom was decorated beautifully. The catering was prepared, and the musicians were ready to perform. "Let's transform it into a celebration," I decided. "Anyone who wants to stay is welcome to join me for dinner and dancing. Not a wedding reception, but a celebration of authentic relationships and new beginnings." About half the guests chose to stay, including my sister, Jessica's boss Margaret, and several people who had known me as Adrienne Blackthorne and wanted to understand more about who I really was. Margaret Chan approached me during dinner. "Miss Sinclair, I owe you an apology. Jessica had been pushing for our firm to pursue your business, and I encouraged her efforts without understanding the personal complications involved. I had no idea she was participating in something so deliberately hurtful."
Margaret, Jessica's professional capabilities aren't diminished by her personal judgment in this situation. What matters now is how she chooses to learn from this experience. Near the end of the evening, as I stood on the ballroom's ocean view terrace watching the sunset, Camille joined me. "So what now?" she asked. "Back to Millbrook Bay? Back to your real life? Some combination?" I considered the question. I think I've learned that authenticity isn't about hiding parts of yourself. It's about finding people who can appreciate all parts of yourself.
The next relationship I have will know from the beginning that I'm someone who owns hotels, makes business decisions, and sometimes works 18-hour days because I love what I do. And if that intimidates them, then they're not the right person for me. As I drove home that evening in my Porsche, I reflected on the lessons embedded in this painful experience. I'd started this journey trying to find authentic love by hiding my authentic self. Instead, I discovered that authentic love requires authentic truth from the very beginning. Damien had taught me something valuable, though not in the way he'd intended. He'd shown me that dimming my light doesn't protect it. It just makes it easier for others to try to extinguish it entirely. The woman who had hidden her success to find love had learned that real love doesn't require you to be smaller. Real love celebrates your brightness and wants to see you shine even brighter. 3 months later, I sold my apartment in Millbrook Bay and moved back to Seattle full-time. I kept the lessons I'd learned about humility and genuine connection, but I stopped apologizing for my success or hiding my ambitions. And when I eventually started dating again, I led with the truth. Hi, I'm Adrienne Sinclair. I own a hotel chain, I work too much, and I'm looking for someone who finds success attractive rather than threatening. The right person, I discovered, thinks that's the most attractive introduction they've ever heard. Sometimes the best revenge isn't making someone pay for what they've done to you. It's refusing to let what they've done change you into someone smaller, quieter, or less authentic than who you're meant to be. The Grand Celestine Resort still hosts weddings every weekend, but now they all feature couples who've built their relationships on truth from the very beginning. That, I've learned, is the only foundation strong enough to support a lifetime of authentic love. 2 incredible stories are waiting for you right below. If this one grabbed your attention, these next ones will too. Click to dive in.